So Aoife's question, actually, I'm going to answer a little bit more, but I might then let us, we can all speak to this because this got upvoted lots, which was basically what does that dialogue entail? There's lots, and Aoife, I know you've been working in the community yourself with 30 communities under the Just Transition Fund, and we got to talk to you in the research part of this project, as did Urban Foresight's colleagues. So we know, how are we going to prioritise talking to communities. So perhaps we've answered that slightly in the overview I just gave you. And I think that mention of local authorities made sense, of course, from Brida's perspective. That's who she works with directly. But the Wheel and Urban Foresight will be actually working directly with the communities. So Brida, do you want to take just the one part of that, and anything else you want to say in relation to the design, even of the tender, as to why it's Urban Foresight and ourselves that are going to be out talking to people?
Yeah, and I suppose just to come back in terms of the kind of governance of this piece, us in the Eastern and Midlands, Carol, working through local authorities, and local authorities are our key partners who have applied for the funding here. So it's coming through the local authorities, and the Wheel and Urban Foresight coming in as part of this, and that having that direct engagement with communities and through the local authorities. So local authorities are very intrinsic to this project in particular, just in relation to that. So yeah, that's just part and parcel of the formality of the Just Transition contract with the department on the Just Transition Fund.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I know that one of the outreach that we've been doing is with the community development teams in the local authorities, who are the most plugged into the local community groups. So they've been very helpful already. So I might,
Susie, can I just
yes,
add
yeah,
there,
jump in there,
just to kind of to batter home the point that you made sort of on your last slide, which is we have two people working as our sort of community engagement outreach people on this program, who are Maria O'Connell and Johnny Sheehan, two colleagues of ours. So they are on the phones. They've been on the phones for the last month. They've been talking to communities. They've been sending follow-up emails and things like that. We have an audience here of 88 people or whatever it was in attendance this morning. So please reach out to us. We know that we're not going to get to absolutely everyone in time. So pick up the phone, give us a call. Our number in the office is 01454 8727, 01454 or just email us directly. And that's how we'll start the dialogues. Okay.
Right. And so I think that maybe this question is also similar, Brida, but it has been upvoted. You can see it there in the chat. But it's basically about how how that relates to LEADER or the Just Transition Fund and all of the aims together, and how will the joined up thinking work? So like the National Peatlands Park linked across the Midland counties and so on. Maybe you could speak to that kind of partnering.
Yeah, there's kind of a couple of dimensions to that. Obviously, the work of the Midlands Regional Transition Team, their objectives are to pull all of those very strands together and have that joined up thinking, and that happens through, there's 4 working groups. PPN are represented on working group 4, for example. So we could the MRTT pulls those various strands together, and then there's a steering group that sits above those 4 working groups to do that. In addition to that, it is worthwhile speaking to the local economic and community plan of the local authority as well, and very much there's the work of the Department of Rural and Community Development, who have integrated climate action and just transition as key elements that should be included and provided for within the LECP. And again, the LECP, through the structures of the LCDCs, the local community development committees, their role is to pull all those various strands together. Unlike the previous first iteration of the LECPs, just transition and climate action will feature very significantly in those plans. And it is incumbent upon us all to actively participate in the consultation and input and contribution to those plans, to make sure that there is joined up thinking from all players involved. If you don't engage and if you don't participate in that, it loses things fall between the gaps. So in this particular instance, for the wider Midlands region, between the MRTT, the work of the MRTT and the LACP processes of the local authorities involved, just transition pieces and climate action pieces should be very significant.
Thank you. And I might give this one to Lewis, that because I know that there's another one coming to you, Breda, and I want to give you a break between questions because we suspected there might be a couple. But there's a question here, and there's two actually, that really are about distinguishing what a just transition, so defining and understanding what just transition is and distinguishing that from sustainability. And Lewis, there was a sort of related question, which is basically about how do we know that the actions are green or sustainable? You know, how do we understand things all the way, for example, the greener options versus this person's not asking about greenwashing, but they're asking about things like the full life cycle of electric cars, or so can you help distinguish what the difference is between, or the relationship between just transition and sustainability, Lewis?
Yeah, I think the just transition is essentially the process of bringing communities to carbon neutrality whilst not having a negative impact upon them, both socially and economically. And that is the key difference to sustainability, whereas sustainability is essentially the outcome of that process to enable essentially the actions and projects within that just transition to become sustainable and to enable communities to essentially have that just transition as a kind of agreed and kind of mutually agreed process. And essentially the sustainability question is the outcome of that. And the actions taken have to be kind of reflective of that sustainability agenda on a global level as well. So that's the kind of key differences there. What was the second question again, Susie?
Well, I suppose, how do we know, or how will a community know, have the expertise and knowledge to know what is truly sustainable? And I think that, that's kind of my understanding of especially Urban Foresight's role in subject matter expertise around this. And there's, it's like interesting. There's a question also coming in from someone who's already, we know there's lots already out there in terms of agencies and things that are happening. And I know you did a lot of scoping of that to be sure you knew about, what was out there. And there's a question about that, when some saying, well, we've actually done, the Sustainable Energy Community Master Plan in Aberlour, but it's a broad brush, and now we need to get to a level of detail. And how do we know that those are the right actions? So I think those are the how do we know in a community, and how will we get to that detail?
Yeah, so you've got that kind of broad brush master plan, which is really key for essentially outlining the potential for that transition and the potential for eventual capital investment. But I think to understand the actual kind of carbon benefits and to understand the cost of that, further technical work will be required to actually identify what that is. And there's a range of partners to actually support that. I mean, here in the UK, we have funds to enable communities to actually procure people to identify what them impacts might be, what the costs may be, what the kind of steps are for enabling communities to actually transition, and what the kind of project, the kind of key investments are to enable to do that, and the actual carbon benefits of them investments. So I think there's an actual middle step there. You've got the master plan, but there's a middle step of having a bit more of a technical feasibility study to actually realize what them capital investments may be and what the actual benefits of that capital investment may be.
Yeah, and that's exactly the sort of mentoring that we hope to be able to offer people. So it's a really living example of what, and we'd be getting into more detail around, us doing some of that legwork for communities, because, my own experience is that communities have the will, the interest, the engagement, the desire to get, doing things, but they don't unless you happen to have, retired people in your community that have a lifetime of experience in every area that you want to work in. They don't always have access to that expertise. So exactly that. It's about how do you procure it, how do you access it, and what can we bring to that. Breda, exactly. I'm going to go back to you. Thank you very much for Lewis, because that's really live example of what we're hoping to put in communities' hands. but there's been quite a lot of questions, and I just summarize them as, and I know you did try to address this already in your presentation, but it's about the specifics of why those communities. And there's, because the Carrow, there's Billy joining from Enniscorthy, for example, in the southeast, asking about that why, and maybe you could just talk to that again a little bit more.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in there in relation to the area that is dedicated or designated as the wider Midlands Just Transition area. Now, it's important to note that this project is under the National Just Transition Fund, which had an area specifically designed. It's the 4 Central Midlands local authorities, Roscommon, and then it was East Galway, West Kildare and North Tipper area, and those were the parameters of the National Just Transition Fund. And those were the parameters, as I see a question there, in relation to the West Kildare Just Transition Plan that was undertaken by under Urban Foresight as well. So that's following the National Just Transition, the parameters and the geographical area that was defined by the department for that purpose. Moving on from that, the EU Just Transition Fund and the programme that's being developed around that sees the area change ever so slightly. That has been underpinned by very robust evidence base done by the Invacon report. And that is, so the monies from the EU Just Transition Fund are kind of targeting a very slightly different region as a consequence. So that's the difference in the regions that you see from the EMRA maps, the Eastern and Midland Regional Assembly maps, and what we're working on particularly for this area. Now, coming back to Billy's question, is it intended to roll out the programme to other areas of the Eastern and Midland Carrow region? Not for the purposes of the Just Transition. There is certainly learnings to be taken, and we will be doing that. I think there's certain things that will be very replicable to other local authorities, other local authority areas, other community initiatives that we will take from this. And that's certainly our role as the Carrows to do that. Insofar as the Just Transition piece goes, it's a very specific designated area under the National Just Transition Framework. It is a very definitive and designated area under the EU Just Transition Fund. That's not something that we have control over in terms of how far we spread it. The most that we can do out of this project is take our learnings, our findings, and some of the toolkits and resources and things like that, and apply them in other community initiatives with other local authorities. So I hope that answers that. It's just coming down really to the work, the evidence base that was done between the National Just Transition Fund and the EU Just Transition Fund.
Yeah, and sharing those wider learnings through all of our mechanisms, through ourselves in the wheel and all of the community, through the social media, through yourselves at local authorities. That is going to be a significant aspect, I am sure, because it always is. People do look when trying to solve things for, who else is doing that? How have they done it? Where has it helped? So, we'll make that a very significant part of collating and gathering and amplifying and sharing everything that is learned here, because I know people look, they look if they're, it doesn't matter if they're in Kerry or Donegal, they look and say, oh, have you heard about that social enterprise, that's doing this? Could we replicate that? And I think that the more replication of solutions, that are shovel ready, the better. It gets people a leg up to not be starting from scratch. And Breda, I'm going to stay with you for just one more then question, which was about and I know this is something in one of our project meetings that you mentioned to me, and I think it probably will answer some of the questions about what your role in this is outside of the Emerge project itself, but although it may feed into it, in training up the local county council staff themselves, because people are making the comment, can they have their own roadmap, their own understanding, and also the evidence on the ground of things that are still, that people notice the practice of sustainability. And I know that pre us coming on board, part of your role has been to create trainings for council. And so would you just talk a little bit to that? Because I think it might be, like it's trying to have all the boats rising, or whatever that phrase is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it speaks to the first question that was put into the chat function there. The Carrows work more broadly in their scope across all services and functions of the local authorities. So while this is a very distinctive project within the realm of just transition, we do work more broadly. We do drive the climate action mandate, and we do training for local authorities to build capacity around climate action, knowledge, implementing initiatives. We'll be turning our focus on the local authority climate action plan. What we're trying to do is mainstream climate action into all services and functions of the local authority. We've done that. We started with the adaptation strategies back in 2019. Every local authority has those. And it really is about enabling the individual services of the local authority and the people within the local authority to gravitate towards and incorporate climate action considerations into the work that they do. Now, while I think that commentary is there to say that there's no sign of councils yet implementing certain initiatives or certain ways of doing things, it is happening, but there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in relation to that. And I see that somebody talking there about the housing developments with roadside hedges and things like that. There's the joined up thinking between departmental funding and departmental their perspective on design and things like that. That all needs to be mainstreamed with climate action. It needs to be climate proofed. Then it needs to be translated down to the local authority to operationalize it as well. So there's a lot of work going on to support certain agencies, certain departments in their work with local authorities as to how to optimize climate action considerations within that and get it rolled out. Just to give you an example, there's research ongoing at the moment within the Carrows about building resilience into the design of roads and the maintenance of roads. But and that will be done within the NTA and the Department of Transport as well. And again, it may not have hit the ground yet, but that research is ongoing and it will hit the ground through guidance and things like that. And that's what the Carrow are involved in particular as well. So, there is a bit of work to be done, but it is being done, and it's all about that mainstreaming aspect of it.